Hello, online pipe community. Ethan, parsimonious piper. And again, I am together with,
Butter Piper.
and we are getting into letter 9 of C.S. Lewis Screwtape letters. So, without any further ado, let's dive in. My dear Wormwood, I hope my last letter has convinced you that the trough of dullness or dryness through which your patient is going at present will not of itself give you his soul, but needs to be properly exploited. What forms the exploitation should take, I shall now consider. In the first place, I have always found that the trough periods of the human undulation provide excellent opportunity for all sensual temptations, particularly those of sex. This may surprise you because, of course, there is more physical energy and therefore more potential appetite at the peak periods. But you must remember that the powers of resistance are then also at their highest. The health and spirits with which you want to use in producing lust can also, alas, be very easily used for work or play or thought or innocuous merriment. The attack has a much better chance of success when the man's whole inner world is drab and cold and empty. And it is also to be noted that the trough sexuality is subtly different in quality from that of the peak, much less likely to lead to the milk and water phenomenon, which the humans call being in love, much more easily drawn into perversions, much less contaminated by those generous and imaginative and even spiritual concomitants which often render human sexuality so disappointing. It is the same with other desires of the flesh. You are much more likely to make your man a sound drunkard by pressing drink on him as an anodyne when he is dull and weary than by encouraging him to use it as a means of merriment among his friends when he's happy and expansive. Never forget that when we are dealing with any pleasure in its healthy and normal and satisfying form, we are, in a sense, on the enemy's ground. I know we have won many a soul through pleasure. All the same, it is his invention, not ours. He made the pleasures. All our research so far has not enabled us to produce one. All we can do is to encourage the humans to take the pleasures which our enemy has produced at times or in ways or in degrees which he has forbidden. Hence, we always try to work away from the natural condition of any pleasure to that in which it is least natural, least redolent of its maker, and least pleasurable. An ever increasing craving for an ever diminishing pleasure is the formula. It's more certain, and it's better style. To get the man's soul and give him nothing in return, that is what really gladdens our Father's heart, and the troughs are the time for beginning the process. But there's an even better way of exploiting the trough. I mean, through the patient's own thoughts about it. As always, the first step is to keep knowledge out of his mind. Do not let him suspect the law of undulation. Let him assume that the first ardors of his conversion might have been expected to last and ought to have lasted forever, and that his present dryness is an equally permanent condition. Having once got this misconception well fixed in his head, you may then proceed in various ways. It all depends on whether your man is of the desponding type who can be tempted to despair, or of the wishful thinking type who can be assured that all is well. The former type is getting rare among the humans. If your patient should happen to belong to it, everything is easy. You have only got to keep him out of the way of experienced Christians, an easy task nowadays, to direct his attention to the appropriate passages in Scripture, and then to set him to work on the desperate design of recovering his old feelings by sheer willpower. And the game is ours. If he is of the more hopeful type, your job is to make him acquiesce in the present low temperature of his spirit and gradually become content with it, persuading himself that it's not so low after all. In a week or two, you'll be making him doubt whether the first days of his Christianity were not, perhaps, a little excessive. Talk to him about moderation in all things. If you can once get him to the point of thinking that religion is all very well up to a point, you can feel quite happy about his soul. A moderated religion is as good for us as no religion at all, and more amusing. Another possibility is that of direct attack on his faith. When you have caused him to assume that the trough is permanent, can you not persuade him that his religious phase is just going to die away like all his previous phases? Of course, there's no conceivable way of getting by reason from the proposition, I am losing interest in this, to the proposition, this is false. But as I said before, it is jargon, not reason, you must rely on. The mere word phase will very likely do the trick. I assume that the creature has been through several of them before, they all have, and that he always feels superior and patronizing to the ones he has emerged from, not because he has really criticized them, but simply because they're in the past. You keep him well fed on hazy ideas of progress and development and the historical point of view, I trust, and give him lots of modern biographies to read. The people in them are always emerging from phases, aren't they? You see the idea? Keep his mind off the plain antithesis between true and false. Nice, shadowy expressions. It was a phase. I've been through all that. And don't forget the blessed word, adolescent. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape.
Thank you, Ethan. Lewis continues in this letter with Screwtape advising and teaching Wormwood how to understand better this law of undulation, this kind of rock back and forth between peaks and between troughs. And he uses the word specifically a few, but he uses dryness. And I thought it would be helpful just to look a little bit at that dryness, because that's not necessarily terms that I would say we use or modern man uses. We usually use psychological terms like depression and things like that, which are real. But in this sense, Screwtape is really trying to go in on this this back and forth between peaks of maybe feeling God's presence and the troughs of not feeling his presence, but specifically going to dryness. So for the viewer who's watching, to not look at this as a psychological state of dryness, but when we don't feel or experience God's presence. So something that we normally do or and so forth might not feel exciting or feel good. That does not mean that God's presence is not there. It just means that we might not feel that presence. And that's exactly what Screwtape wants to make sure that this new Christian doesn't really focus on this dryness, that this just might be a natural ebb and flow of life, and therefore don't lose faith and so forth in the troughs. But I think, and again, I think the viewer, those who are watching, to be able to just discern themselves about what a dry time might be compared to maybe more of a psychological state of depression or something like that, if that makes sense.
It does. And in fact, it's a spiritual dry time where we're not feeling God's closeness that, as Screwtape points out, that makes it much more easy for us to fall prey to physical temptations, because we use those to fill that gap and to create an emotional satisfaction. And he uses the examples of sex and alcohol. Most particularly, he points out that these pleasures were created by the enemy, God, and that if we're enjoying them in their correct context, then we're on God's turf, the enemy's turf, and the Father below doesn't have nearly so much influence over us. It's when we're in these spiritual troughs that we can be tempted to take any of these pleasures to a point, as he says, of perversion. And whether it's sexual perversions, well, we see those all around us, even more so than Lewis did at the time, or alcohol and drug abuse, gluttony, Gluttony is enjoying a good thing, a good food, but to an excess, a degree that God did not intend, and that many of us, and I, I'm not pointing fingers at other people. If you've seen my waistline, are guilty of. The um, the next thing, though, in that is that he wants the Father below wants to drive us to the point where we have to enjoy more and more and more, or partake of an increasing amount of whatever this pleasurable activity is, but we get decreasing pleasure out of that. We see that in addicts of all kinds. And eventually, the point is for them to take our soul and give us absolutely nothing in return. That's their end game.
And Lewis refers to uh, phases, like getting this client or his patient, I should say, to look at especially the trough as a phase instead of really looking at this undulation. There's going to be times of a peak where you're going to feel God's presence. There's going to be times where you're not, and so obviously Screwtape wants to really drive towards the peak, seek those gifts, and that's when the perversions can come in. But he's specifically referring to the troughs, the time where, like, he's a new Christian, and there's going to be a time where anybody in new conversion of to a faith, to Christianity, they're going to have that high that they're going to feel such on fire. And I've seen it. I'm sure you have, Ethan. They're on fire for the faith, but then there's going to be a natural time where they're going to hit a trough and they're not going to feel on fire. And so Screwtape is telling Wormwood, capitalize on that, make him think that, well, it was just a phase that he was going through, that it wasn't real, and keep him ambiguous. Keep him ambiguous within those quote phases. Don't have him actually look at it. It just might be a natural time of a peak and a trough, and the trough doesn't mean that you're bad or something is wrong. It could just be a natural time.
Yeah, this notion of undulation versus trying to make the patient believe that this period of dryness is permanent, that this is normal, that his early experience was the exception, and that God doesn't really let you feel him close to you all the time, and chances are good that he never will again. This is a permanent condition. Deal with it. Um, we really see Screwtape's advice in playing the mind games, and keeping the patient from focusing on facts. Don't do that. Keep him focused on jargon, and like you said, particularly this word phase, because we've all been through phases of things, and if we only think of our religion as a phase, then we can move on to whatever the next phase is.
I believe in the previous letter that the one of the antidotes, I should say, in these trough times, the antidote might not be the right word, but is, the enemy above, being God. He wants us to be obedient during these times of trough, or be obedient to the good that we're called to do, even if we're not feeling it. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what Screwtape wants Wormwood to attack, is being obedient during that time of trough. Get his mind to go back and forth that, that was a phase, or just keep him, or get him hooked on another craving to get him distracted.
Well, and if we fall prey to this notion that the downturn, this lukewarm feeling of God's presence, or even absence thereof, that's normal, then our faith becomes lukewarm, and as Lewis points out, to Screwtape, that's as good as no faith at all. And Lewis doesn't pull out his scriptural justifications for some of the things he said, but if you look in Revelation, the better to be hot and cold because the lukewarm is going to get spit out. It's so easy to fall prey when we're just kind of blasé about things.
Because I really don't think the average person, like I said, I'm not necessarily all time of my life keep myself out of that, but dryness is not something we think about.
Mm-hmm.
It's always an emotional state instead of like maybe I'm in a dry time. It's not bad. It's just a dry time, and to be able to make those distinctions of a more of a psychological state, or I'm chasing a craving, I'm chasing the good feeling I used to have, instead of where is, in other words, it ultimately comes down, where is God in this peak? Where is God in this trough? And that's exactly what Screwtape doesn't want us to be thinking about. Where is God in this? Because if I don't think of that, then I'm going to chase that craving for a peak, and it's going to go not in a good place. Or I can I can take a dryness and get in the dumps, because I'm not asking where God is in all this.
Well, and where is God is a factual question, and he does not want us focusing on anything where we might be using facts and reason. Well, folks, I hope that that this helps you to combat those periods of dryness, of separation, sometimes from God, that we all feel occasionally, and sometimes more than occasionally. And if it did, let us know in a comment below. Would love to hear from you. Either way, like something you like. We will catch you next week.